Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we are getting to the absolute cutting edge of woodworking. We're going to figure out how exactly do you go about getting that sharp edge every time as a beginner. There's lots of things to look at. Let's dive in. So I don't care whether you're talking about a card scraper, a chisel, a saw, a plane iron, everything, they all come down to a point. And that point, the finer you can get that, the sharper your tool is. Sharpening is just the art of getting two planes to intersect. And the finer you can get that point, the sharper your iron is. If you can get this down to a single molecule right there on the tip, this will be the sharpest it can possibly be. So different steels will give you different keennesses. Some of them will allow you to get down to a couple hundred atoms right there on the tip. But some of them will be brittle, so those couple hundred atoms will break off very easily. And there's a bunch of different balances that come down to it. But the finer you can get this, the sharper it will be. So the question is, how do you get this to a very fine, tight point? So for instance, let's take this chisel. What we want to do is, if this was my sharpening plate or stone, I want to put it on at whatever angle I want it to be. So if I want to put a 25, 30 degree, 35 degree on it, whatever it is, I hold it at that angle and I do my sharpening at that point, moving it back and forth. The problem is the human body is not very good at holding a very accurate point, and that takes a lot of skill and a lot of time and a lot of body mechanics to be able to maintain that perfect angle all the time. And if, for instance, the chisel rocks up and down, so at the far end it's down here and at the back end it's up here, then you're going to end up with a tip that isn't flat here, it's actually slightly cambered. And a lot of people hate the idea of a cambered bevel, something that is rounded slightly. From being the point here to being the point here. As you're sharpening, you're changing your angle on it. The thing is, there really is no standard problem for having this bevel. It's just something that really annoys people. As long as this comes to an immediate point right here and you have that sharp edge right here, that's all that matters. This then brings us to one of my least favorite topics, jigs. There really is something to be said for just freehanding. It's so much faster, it's so much easier. You just get it on there and you go to town, you're done, 30 seconds and it's sharp. I don't take any more time to that. It's just my hands and the plate and nothing else. And that is very, very nice. The problem with that is it takes a lot of time to learn. It takes skill, and skill only comes about by doing it over and over and over again and learning and improving and slowly working on your technique until eventually it just becomes body mechanics that your body knows what to do. And until you get to that point, you're stuck with chisels that aren't quite as sharp as you want them to be. And that's really where jigs come in. Now this is the Veritas Mark II, and it's my all-time favorite. If you've got to have a jig, this is the best one on the market by far. And the nice thing about this is it has this set on here, so you can set it to 1, 2, or 3, red, yellow, or green. It doesn't matter which one, as long as you look at the corresponding over here. So in this case, I have it on yellow right now, and so this is pointing at yellow, means it's going to be a 25 degree. If I want it to be a 35 degree, then I've got to stop and move this back. And let's actually set this to 35 degree, because that's where I put my plane irons. I can lock this in here at 35 degrees on yellow, and then I can loosen these up, slide my iron back, and now when I put this in, I can set that mark on 2-inch because it's a 2-inch iron. We can flip it over, and I can slide it up until it touches this stop here, lock these two down. And so now when I take this off, I know that from the wheel to this, that's a 35 degree angle. That is exactly where I need to sharpen my iron, and that will give me my 35 degree cut on this. This just takes all the guesswork out of it, and because it has this big flat wheel, you're actually doing a very similar style and holding on to it. This is going to guarantee that it's held at the same angle all the time, so all of your sharpenings are going to give you a good fine point. As long as your back is clean, you don't have any scratches and scars and nicks on there, this will be clean from your sharpening, and that will bring those two edges into a nice, fine, sharp point. Now, a few misconceptions. Number one, this will not guarantee that you have a 90 degree edge. This does not guarantee you have a 90 degree edge. This only guarantees that the bevel stays at the right angle as long as you're putting the same pressure on the wheel that you're putting on the edge. In all honesty, you don't have to make this at 90 degrees. If you went and checked all my irons, you would see that most of them are not at 90 degrees. This one's off by almost a 1/16 of an inch from side to side. And same thing with my chisels. It really doesn't matter that they are 90 degrees to the side. That has absolutely no bearing on their function. If they are visually out of 90 degrees, I look at it and I say, ooh, yeah, this end is sticking out farther. Then when I sharpen it, I just put a little more pressure on that side. And with 2 or 3 sharpenings, then I'll suddenly realize that it's out of square the other way. And if it's visually out of square, then I put more pressure on it. I never ever bring a square up to see, ooh, am I in or out of square, unless I'm showing it for a video. It doesn't matter. That's why they have lateral adjusters on planes. And for chisels, if it's visually out of square, put more pressure on one side. It's the exact same thing. And if it's less than visually out of square, in other words, you have to bring a square in to check it, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything at all about how the chisel works. So then you don't want to use the jig. How do you learn to do it freehand? And that really comes down to slowly teaching your body how to do it. Number one, you don't want to be moving like this. If this arm is swinging, you have a fulcrum up here, and so this whole thing is going to be rotating. When you're back here, it's high. When you go forward, you're down low. And so you're going to be changing your pitch. That's not a problem to put the camber on there like I talked about before. The only problem with it is you always need to make sure you're stopping at the same point. Because when you come back here, you're only hitting the tip at this spot here. You're never actually hitting the tip out here. Everything out here is just working on the back of the bevel. The only time you're actually working on the sharpening point is when you're all the way back here. As long as you always stop at the same point, and at the end you're always at the exact same angle, that doesn't matter. But when you're first learning, you're going to be at a different angle back here every time you move. And so you want to stop moving the arm. You want the arm to stay put, and you want your whole body to move. You want to be moving at your ankle. You want all the movement to be focused down on your ankle. So as you're moving around, your whole body is staying put, and the angle on the iron is staying almost exactly where you want it. Eventually, you start to make the movement at your hips and not at your ankle. And then eventually you can get to the point where you're moving up at your shoulder. And then eventually your wrist will start to learn where it needs to make the modification so that you can then move at your arm. And so now when I sharpen, I do it this way. But that's only because I've learned the muscle memory to be able to adjust this. And you learn that by slowly bringing it up from the ankle to the waist, to the shoulders, and over time, over a couple of years, you'll learn how to hold this at the right angle all the time. Now that doesn't mean that my bevel isn't slightly rounded. It is ever so slightly rounded. And if you're doing it free-handed, it's going to be slightly rounded. But as I told you before, I'm learning to always stop at the same point. There is a certain muscle memory that comes into it, and my body knows how to lock everything up and how to allow the wrist to move to compensate for the shoulder movement. And so it's one of those things you just have to work over time. And if you're still trying to get it and you're not getting it the way you want it, think about moving your ankles and lock everything from the waist up. So your waist, your shoulder, your arm, your elbow, none of that moves. It's just your ankles that are moving to lock it in place and turn your whole self into that jig. Now that's all well and good for a chisel or a plane iron, other things you take to the plate, but how does that actually translate to other things like a card scraper and a saw? With a saw, you're not taking it to the sharpening plate. You're taking the sharpening to the saw stays put. But the same techniques come into play as the file goes over the saw. Your arm is doing the moving, and your arm is going to want to do this with it. And so at this point, you're up here, and at this point, you're up here. And you have to learn to lock everything in so that you move back and forth. It makes it very easy with a file if you use both hands, but even with that, there's still a tendency to want to rock. And so if you lock everything up top, and then slowly lock everything down until just your ankles are moving, you can actually get your whole body to do the jig and keep the file nice and flat. And you'll get much cleaner teeth because you're actually able to stabilize it rather than getting a rounded profile on there. When it comes to card scrapers, some people will notice that they get a really nice burr over on this side, but when they shift over to this side, they can't get anything at all. In the middle, you're kind of getting this mediocre curving on there. And what happens is, again, your whole body is moving your angle. And so your angle of the burr then changes the angle of the cut. And that's the attack angle that the card needs. You want to keep your card up a little bit. You don't want to have it right down here. Otherwise, you're going to have a very steep, weak burr that's going to break off easily. You want to be able to keep it up high, but that means that you have to keep your angle the same way on your burnisher. And so, again, you're going to want to think about moving your whole body, not just moving your hand. So that's a lot of theory and why, but I want to actually explain what I generally recommend to new people starting out. And it's around this point I have to address, I'm not going to be talking about all the arguments that come around with having a secondary bevel or a tridentary bevel or a back bevel or using the ruler trick, and there are thousands of ways to do it. Find a way that works well for you, and you'll find that there's a method out there that works very well for you. It may not work for other people. So try some different things and learn, but don't expect any one method to work. That's why today I'm not talking about method per se. I'm talking about how do you learn how to sharpen, the mechanics that have to go into it. And no matter how you do it, learning to keep a stable arm and not rocking all over the place will give you immediate and great benefits. And so for most people, when you're first getting started, I'm going to recommend get a good jig. If you've got the money for it, the Veritas Mark II is phenomenal. Don't waste your money with the narrow gauge thing. You don't need it. This one will do you all of it. This is a phenomenal jig that works really well. I have links to it down below. They're not affiliate. I don't make anything from it. This is the one that I generally use if I want to use a jig. That will get you good results. That will teach you how to sharpen, and it will teach you how sharp is actually sharp. And eventually you'll get to the point where you just don't get any sharper and you'll realize, this is truly sharp. Then you can start to slowly learn how to get the body mechanics in there. Because when you're first getting started, you're not going to get a sharp chisel trying to sharpen it by hand, and it's going to be incredibly frustrating. And so having a jig will get rid of that frustration to give you the time to learn how to do it freehand. And once you put a few years into it, you'll eventually find that suddenly it clicks. And you can sharpen freehand anytime. And it is so freeing to be like, it's a little dull. Stroke, 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 stroke. We're back at it. It's sharp and ready to go. So think about it as a full body exercise to learn how to sharpen. Don't move with your arms right off the bat. Think about moving at your ankles. And you're going to be shifting your whole body back and forth at your ankle. Everything is locked. My arm is locked. My shoulder's locked. My waist is locked. Everything is moving at the ankles. And then eventually I can get my hips to move into it, and my shoulders, and the rest of my body is still locked, and then eventually my shoulders start to move and my wrist then compensates for that roll, and I can move in and out with just my arm. And it's one of those things that eventually, once you get one method down, you can loosen up a little bit and add a little bit more movement and a little bit more movement until you just get your arms going. And once you have just your arms going, you can start to work on your speed, and soon you're done. And it is incredibly fun to be able to grab a chisel and go strike, stroke, stroke. And you know that it's at the right angle because your arm knows what that feels like. I almost never check the bevel angle of my chisels and planes because in reality it doesn't make that big a difference if you're off a few degrees one way or the other. Don't worry about that. Eventually your body will just learn that, this is 35 degrees, and it keeps it pretty close to that. And if you check most of my chisels, they're probably within about 5 or 6 degrees of 35 degrees. And that's more than enough accuracy for what I need. This is one of these fun topics that when you're first getting started, sharpening is very frustrating because you're getting mixed results. Sometimes it's sharp and sometimes it's not, and sometimes you think it's sharp but it's actually not, and there are just so many things to go into it. And if you can learn how to lock your whole body in to replace what a jig does, then you'll be a big step ahead of it. But a lot of times if you just need to get going and you need something sharp, get a jig that will hold things in place for you. When it actually comes down to the method you want to use, a lot of beginners really like using the ruler trick because it gives you a very reliable, consistent sharpening. Because with the ruler trick, you're actually taking a little bevel on the back. So you're cleaning up the back, so if there's any scratches in there, you get a nice connection with your main bevel. Some people like having the secondary bevel on there. Personally for me, I never touch the back other than the initial flattening or just checking that it's flat. I'll leave it alone and strop it as needed, but I never actually sharpen the back. I will just do a main bevel and go. It's 30 seconds and we're done. I do that for my chisels and my planes. That's what I like. If you want to see specifics on that, I have several videos on how to sharpen everything out there. But I do say go and look at other people out there. Go and look at Rob Cosman. Go look at Matt Cremona. Many woodworkers out there have their own method of how they do sharpening. And find something that works for you. And that's one of the best ways I can get to it because everyone's different. Everyone likes things in a different manner. There is no best method. It's all about having fun. So find something that makes you happy and the world will be a much better place. So I hope you like this. If you do have any questions or ideas or something that really helped you out, let me know down in the comments below. I'm always learning and I'd like to hear any tips and techniques that you have. Also, if you want to help out the channel, you can hit like, comment, share, subscribe. Those things honestly do help us. The algorithm is very picky, and those are one of the things that it looks at more than anything else. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to everyone who's scrolling over here on the side. They are patrons on Patreon, and they are quite literally keeping the lights on. Also, the members on the channel who've clicked the little join button, I do have special perks that I give to patrons and members from time to time. Thank you for keeping us going and sponsoring us. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So I think that'll do it for now, and until next time, have a wonderful day. No, I'm not going to say that this was a sharp video or a dull video, but I do have to say it was kind of edgy.